Welcome to CEWT Talk. This broadcast is brought to you by the Continuing Education Workforce Training Division of Idaho State University's College of Technology. This podcast is part of our continuing outreach efforts, and the format is conversational. We will be having conversations with businesses, professionals, entrepreneurs, community agencies, and, in all cases, difference makers. Now, let's get started with CEWT Talk. Hello, everyone. This is Jason Batalden here with the Assistant Director at Continuing Education Workforce Training at the College of Technology at Idaho State University. We are bringing to you today another episode of our CEWT Talk. We're well into our first year, and so we're excited, and we want to say thank you to our 6 loyal listeners, and a special shout out to my mom and dad, because they're 2 of the 6. But we're glad to be here today. We have a special guest. But before we get started on the guest, let's do a quick reminder of the rules. Remember, we are on this 20-minute episode, so we have to cram a lot in a short amount of time. And Paul, we're not really that good at getting it done in 20 minutes much anymore, are we?
No, we always go over.
But it seems to work, and we're happy about it. Oh yeah, by the way, Paul is with us today, and those of you who do follow the show know that Paul is our tech and audio video guru, and also participates in the show and asks questions or contributes to the conversation with things that I always forget. So with that said, we said welcome, and we know when we say welcome, the 20-minute timer starts. And so today I'm just going to kind of start us off. We have Dr. Sheldon Aikens with us today. He's the leading founder of the Leading Equity. He is the founder of the Leading Equity Center and host of the Leading Equity podcast. He lives here right in Idaho, so we're so glad to have him with us today. He has over 11 years in education, and he served as a teacher, principal, and director of special education. And Dr. Aikens, I am excited about our conversation today, as we just kind of want to learn a little bit more about the Leading Equity Center, what you do and the work that you do, and especially how it kind of, I don't want to steal your thunder, but how important it is to education as we're moving forward in this in our diverse and culture that we live in across the country. So welcome, Dr. Aikens. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Jason and Paul, for having me on the show today. It is definitely a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be able to interact with some local Idahoans as well. So this is a big deal. So I appreciate that. Like you said, I am the director of the Leading Equity Center, and I'm also a podcast host myself. My podcast is entitled Leading Equity, and basically what I do is, I'm an educational consultant. In addition to my daytime job as a special education director, I support educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their school. Often we kind of get confused with equality versus equity. Equality is giving everybody the same thing, one size fits all kind of approach. But when we start thinking about our students and the individual needs that our students have, that's the equity piece. Some students might need more than others. Some might need less. And so that's the part that I really support our teachers with in ensuring that our kids are successful ultimately.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on the need, right? And the need meaning some students, in fact, all students, right, need something different to be successful. And that requires a training to the teachers, a training to the system, training in the classrooms, training in the school districts themselves. That's the need specifically. And so how did that need in your life come to the forefront? In other words, how did you started out as a teacher? Is that you woke up? So in all full disclosure, my wife is a teacher, and she will tell you, from the 6th grade, she knew exactly what she wanted to be and has been nothing but a teacher. And that's an amazing thing. Is that sort of your calling, or for you too? You just knew it?
Similar story. 12th grade was my year. That was when I knew that I was going to be a school teacher. I had this, I loved history growing through K-12, but particularly the 12th grade year, I had a teacher, Mr. Fielder, awesome history teacher, and he was the basketball coach of the school. So I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to teach history and I want to be a basketball coach all at the same time. That was my goal. So I went to college and pursued, social science education, knocked out my degree, got that in, and as soon as I got a first teaching job, I taught history and I started coaching basketball. And that was it for me. So yeah, definitely, I think if you're an educator, it's, even if you're one of those second career, this is not necessarily what you started in. But those of us who are educators know, there was that moment that it was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is me.
Yeah. I think that speaks to the profession itself, that it goes beyond, and I'm not denigrating anyone else. We all have those passions, right? We all have those certain things or interests that lead us in, but teaching to me, and I guess I am prejudiced on this just because my wife's one, right? And I've always felt like there needs to be a support group for teacher spouses, because if you've ever gone to a party with your teacher partner, and then all the teachers get together and do teacher talk, and the rest of you just stand out there and wonder when it's time to go home. So there needs to be a support group for teacher spouses. I'm just shouting that out.
I think not only a support group, I think that's fair. I think a stipend is helpful as well. I can't tell you how many times my wife has helped me decorate my room. That's always been the one thing I'd never wanted to do was, or it felt like I could do. It's how do I organize things? Where do I put my desk? And what kind of poster should I put up? And so the countless hours that my wife has put in with helping me out with that, in addition to helping me grade papers and just all those little things that have, being teachers, sometimes we feel overwhelmed and we grab our spouses, our partners, and say, hey, can you help us do these things? So I think a stipend, in addition to the support group, is fair.
There you go. I support that 100%. You've got my vote for that, for sure. But so you started out as a history teacher, correct?
Yeah.
Basketball coach. And then through that career, the issue of equity, because that's your focus, right? I mean, that's you're the founder of Leading Equity Center. So can you touch on that a little bit? When did that become sort of for you the mission, or at least the purpose or the goal of moving into that a little bit?
So I know we have 20 minutes, so I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. Honestly, I didn't know what equity was 10 years ago when I first started teaching. I had no clue what equity was. I just kind of got an idea that there's things that I need to be more mindful of. So first job, straight out of college, I'm sitting on my couch playing video games with my brother, and I'm like, man, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. I was working at a call center and it just wasn't fun, taking phone calls, listening to people complain all day, every day. I get a random call from a superintendent in the Virgin Islands. He says, hi, is this Sheldon? I'm like, yes. He's like, this is a superintendent from the Virgin Islands. Do you want to teach out here? I'm like, yes, of course. Are you kidding? You said Virgin Islands? Yes, I'm there. So he sets me up. I'm on the first plane over there. I'm teaching. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And, it's an island, just the culture, everything there, right? And so there was one day where one of my teachers, who was actually my roommate at the time, he said, hey, Sheldon, man, everybody thinks you're very rude to them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, what do you say when someone says good morning to you or good afternoon to you? And I say, well, I just say, hey, what's up, y'all? How y'all doing? How you feeling? What's up, y'all? What's up? Because that's what I was used to saying. That's how I used to talk, right? And so he's like, nah, man, you can't do that. When someone says good morning to you, you have to say good morning back. If someone says good afternoon, you say good afternoon back. That is our culture. That is what we do. So it clicked. I'm like, oh, so I am being rude based on my knowledge, my lens, my world my experiences, my background, I'm being rude because I'm in a totally different culture. Yes, I'm black, but all black people aren't the same, right? Culturally, there's different things, right?
Right.
And so there was that moment where I was like, okay, I have to be mindful of the students in front of me, the community in front of me, and I just dove right in head first. I mean, I literally did everything I could to learn about the culture, to learn. I mean, we're speaking English, but I'm the one with the accent, right? No one can understand anything I'm saying.
Right.
I can't understand anything that they're saying,
right.
And we're both speaking English. And so that was a time for me to really start thinking about what education looks like, because sometimes as teachers, we come in with our own experiences, our own lenses, and we're not looking at the world through our students' eyes. Mm-hmm. And that's where that equity clicked. That's where I can't just instill what I know and what I do and how I view the world. I need to be mindful. I need to be responsive to the students in my classroom. And that was that moment. I mean, I started being, I was a kayak coach, Jason and Paul. Like, I'd never been on a boat. Like, I had never done any of those things, but I dove into that. I just became a kayak coach, and I started camping. I did all the beach stuff. I went to all the festivals. I went to all these things, and that was my experience. And that was that first moment of, okay, this is the work I need to be doing.
Right on. And not to make the show at all about me, but I had a similar experience. I grew up in Wyoming, right? Mm-hmm. A little tiny town, 4,000 people, white as white could be, you know what I mean? Just, and not a good white, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? In the sense that people were great, but, a lot of racist mentalities and attitudes about people of different color and cultures. The first job I got out of college was in Tampa, Florida. Mm. I love Tampa, Florida. I'm never going to live east of the Mississippi ever again in my life unless it's in Tampa, Florida. I mean, talk about a cultural melting pot. Haitians, Dominicans, Jamaicans, I mean, you name it, right? And then native Floridians, which are a weird bunch of people all about themselves. I mean, it's a great place. And so me, this little boy from 4,000 town in Buffalo, Wyoming to Tampa, Florida was a culture shock. And it was a wonderful but very challenging experience. And that's something, equity doesn't come without challenge. It doesn't come without change. It doesn't come without understanding someone else, and understanding those differences doesn't come without sandpaper moments, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got to sand off those rough edges, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have had that moment where it's like, oh shoot, what the heck have I been doing? Like, I totally took people for granted. I just came in here, and you know what? So I live in Idaho now, right? And I work on a reservation, and I had to, just keep those things in mind. I can't come into a group of a community and just feel like I'm the stuff and feel like, I'm just going to instill all of my mindset and knowledge. I got a PhD and all this stuff. No, like, I'm in someone else's world. I'm a guest. I'm a visitor, and I need to embrace the culture and not come in on a way of looking like as if I know everything. No, I don't know. I don't know anything. And so the time that I have spent over the last, 4 years that I've been working out here has been very influential to my life and my spirituality and just the things I've seen and believe in. And it's just like I've been so open to these things. Had I just approached the reservation and not been open to learning and developing relationships and trying to be a part of this community, man, I don't think I would have lasted. I don't think I would have made it this long, but it's so important to me wherever I'm at. So even if I'm in the Virgin Islands, or if I'm on a reservation, if I'm in another state or town, for me to embrace the culture that's available to me and learn as much as I can.
Well, and I think that hits on the front of that too. And we can't be ignorant to the fact there are differences, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we just can't pretend just because you're dealing with the same, let's say you're teaching high school, right? High school on a reservation, high school in Southeast Idaho, high school in Boise, wherever that high school is, they're going to have cultural differences based on who the people there is. And you can't walk into that being purposely blinded. You have to say things are different here. It's not a judgment. That's not a good or bad evaluation, but to recognize, okay, and I have to adapt to that, right? There has to be, and I think sometimes we've maybe there has been this pressure to not the polite thing to do is not to acknowledge the differences.
Well, to say I don't see color or I don't see those things. I mean, that comes up a lot. But you see color. I mean, if anyone's watching this video, they know there's 2 white guys and a black guy on the show. Like right. To tell me that you don't see color is you're erasing someone's identity. And so I know people say, well, I treat everybody the same, and all our blood is red, and all those kind of conversations. But there are differences, and not only differences from a racial standpoint, but I learned myself that just because I'm black, if I enter another place that's predominantly black, doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to understand and know the language, culture, and traditions of that community that I'm entering in, just because we share the same race.
Or even the same language. Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, the way I was brought up is that old proverb: you don't know anyone unless you've walked a mile in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And every time you go into a new situation, you can't look at someone across the room going, "I know everything about them." You don't. Right. You don't know anything about them. When I'm originally from Massachusetts, and in a previous life, I was a real estate appraiser, and my job was part of doing the appraisal. I did the Boston area, and I did the areas of Boston that were mostly minorities, and I would go into that neighborhoods, and I had coworkers that would go, "How do you do that?" I mean, I would never go there. I go, "What? It's a neighborhood. It's their community." I go, I have never run into a problem. I've never had an issue because it's their community. You go in with the openness that you're just walking into someone's neighborhood, it's another community, and don't go in with your biases. You'll be fine. It's that look of respect when you're in someone's presence. You look them in the eye and you show them the proper respect, and they'll show you the proper respect.
That's those stereotypes, right? People,
right.
Limited information, limited knowledge. All I have to go off of is movies, music, maybe some TV shows. And so I expect, or I think this is how people are. That's different than me. This is how people respond, and this is how they behave. People love basketball. Black people love basketball because that's what I watch and that's what I know from movies. But really, do you really know that individual? Do you know that community? My son does not play any sports at all. I mean, he's the total opposite of what you would perceive or stereotype an individual, a black person. But again, if you don't take the time to get to know my son or other people of certain communities, then you're going to have these biases, like you said, and we're going to make these prejudgments, and we're not going to know the people at all. We have to take things on an individual basis, and that's what I do.
And I think that's a really important thing you said there is everyone's an individual. To go in with these preconceived on our entire community, I get so angry about that.
Well, and so jumping on from there for just a second too is so your work is with school districts, right? I mean, that's what you're working with them. I'm assuming to help them understand those biases, and those biases exist, right?
Yeah. We all have biases.
The reality of who we are, because we all have different experiences. So your work with school districts, with teachers in the classroom, how do you kind of, and again, I know we're on time crunch, but where do you start with something like that? Where do you start? You walk in and say, "Hey, you all got biases. Let's get used to it and go from there." I mean,
I start with self-awareness. That's because in order to really do this work, you have to look at yourself and say, "Oh man, this is things that, I was raised a certain way. This is family, the community I grew up in, those kind of things have shaped my judgment of the world."
Right.
So I always start with self-awareness, and I have plenty of resources that I utilize, to activities that I utilize to say, okay, what are you thinking? What's your circle? What are these different forms of biases? And how can we challenge those biases? And often our biases come from stereotypes. That is the root of a lot of the biases that we have, because we have limited information on other people. And so we automatically start to, we see someone wearing a certain way, wearing clothes a certain way, or dressed a certain way, someone with a suit on, we automatically think, oh, they must be about business. Or we see someone with jeans on, baggy clothes, or a hoodie, oh, they must be trouble. So we don't know anything about the individual. The same person could be wearing a different, like you could have a picture of the same person wearing different clothes, and your perceptions will change. We all have these biases. So again, I start with the self-awareness. What are those biases that you have in relation to where you've been, where you've grown up? And then from there, we can build on how we can better support our students.
Right. And, that idea too, though, right, is that self-awareness, because we all have to have coping mechanisms. We are an ordered people. I mean, that is our nature as human beings. We do not thrive in disorder. And so when we come across new environments, we have to take what limited knowledge we have and try to apply a set of rules or a set of guidelines or a set of social sort of rules that apply to help us adapt to these different situations. And it takes the courage to be able to set those down and re-examine them from a different angle, different perspective, and truly ask the question, are these working? I mean, are these helping me accomplish the goals? Sheldon, I do not want to pretend I know your job at all. So I'm sorry. I get kind of fired up about some of these things.
No, get fired up, man. That's
but if I'm off the base, you slap me down and correct me and say, no, dude, you're way wrong, because but that's my thought. And so when you go into these classrooms, the first thing you do is talk to the teachers and say, become aware who you are. And that's a hard thing. Just pull up your Facebook page, right? And see how many struggles people are having with setting down their personal biases.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah. And it starts there. I mean, there's definitely more to it, but to me, I like to get people self-aware so that they can be more open to feedback. Sometimes as teachers, we get forced into these PDs and, I got to go to another professional event. How long is this one? And what time is this over? So I want to try to create a space where folks start to become more open. Wait. Okay. This is pretty relevant to me. I'm ready to engage in this conversation. But if I just jump in and say, y'all were wrong, the way that you're approaching students is terrible. Like if I come at things that way, it's probably not going to go well. Right. But if I say, hey, here's some things I want you to consider. Have you thought about this? Have you looked at kind of, self-reflected on things? Then I can try to, break down. Having conversations about race, especially with white folks, is not always the easiest conversation, because there's that fragility there. There's people like, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I might be perceived as racist. I want to try to break down those barriers and say, let's engage in these conversations, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable to have these conversations, but we need to talk about it, because there are issues that you may not be experiencing, but they're experiencing. Your students are probably experiencing these things, especially your students of color. So we need to engage in this conversation. We can't avoid it. We have to talk about it.
We do. And we have to be willing to use, language and the language that, the hard word, right? Let me be careful. What I mean by that is what's difficult, you hit the nail on the head. What's hard about Black people, or that I have talking with, a Black person about race, is I'm trying to stay away from the racist word, right? Because I don't want to be a racist. But to a certain degree, my biases as from my own culture are racist. Is that too far to take that?
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
Well, let's go back to my example. Let's go back to me growing up in Little Buffalo, Wyoming, right? I don't want to I shouldn't have mentioned the town because, my parents still live there. But, I vividly have memories of people of different culture, different color, moving in the community and not staying in the community more than a month.
Right.
You know what I mean? And now when you go back to Buffalo, Wyoming, God bless them, there's some different color in Buffalo, Wyoming. Praise the Lord. So, but that wasn't the case, 50 years ago. So, I take that experience. So right in that world, why wasn't that? Well, you heard from my culture that people of a color possess certain stereotypical attributes or lacked at certain things or this. And that was the only feedback I got, right? I had to go to Tampa, Florida to be exposed to, wait a minute, that was not true, right?
Yeah.
But for me to get from where I was to that experience I had in Tampa, Florida, I had to acknowledge that my view was racist.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, and it's based off of how you were influenced, right? Your town that you're talking about, the conversations, the circles that you were involved in, and the conversations that, you probably saw stuff. I'll give you an example because I actually have the book right here. I don't know if you heard of this book. It's How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Really
I just heard this. Yeah. I heard. I don't remember where I read it. I just heard about it. Yeah.
So he talks about, in his book, how, folks will say, well, I don't wear a hood. I'm not burning crosses. So I can't be racist, right? But what he argues in his book is that, well, there is no such thing as not racist. There is either racist or anti-racist. So an anti-racist is an individual who's actively trying to dismantle white supremacy, right? So if I'm saying, well, I saw a black person, for example, being mistreated by a white person, and I know that was a racist act toward this individual of color, and I didn't say anything. I just walked away or I turned my head. So that wasn't me participating in this. I can't be racist. But what he's saying is, well, what could you have done in that situation? How could you have intervened? How could you have stopped a situation that you knew was based off of race and you just didn't do it? And so because you didn't participate in this activity, that doesn't mean that you haven't, what's the word?
Culpability or
so bystander, if you will, right? So that's what he's saying is, how can we take things further? So Jason, for example, you said that you grew up in a certain area and there's conversation that you heard, maybe you even heard the N-word being spoken around people around you, right? But if you didn't say, please don't use that word. That is very offensive to me and to black people. Or please don't use this word because that's offensive to, another race that has, the racial slurs. If we didn't say anything, but we just said, I didn't say it. I didn't participate in it. And that's what he's trying to get folks to really think about is, okay, how can we go beyond not participating in these events and not doing them ourselves, but we see these things, we witness these things happen, we witness these conversations happen. We see someone is intentionally keeping someone back because of their skin color, or they're not going to hire them because of their skin color, or their name sounds too ethnic. Oh, I can't say their name, so I'm not going to hire them. We're not even going to interview them, even though this person is qualified, but we just won't go past the name on that paper or their address. Oh, they're from that community. Oh, from that street. Oh, no, we don't want them coming in here. You know how they're probably trouble. But if you didn't, just because you didn't actually say that or participate and you didn't actually try to stop or intervene, especially because you're in that circle, you're a part of those conversations that are happening where there aren't people of color around. And if you're not doing anything about it, that's the part that he's really trying to push. It's like, how can you be anti-racist where we're actively trying to dismantle white supremacy?
There we go. And I'm going to leave it at that because our timer went off about, 20 minutes ago.
No, I think that was really important to get out. I think that was really important. I would never want to cut you off at that point. But the one thing I did want to talk about, because this is all very important, but we have to have you back. We absolutely have to have you back because you're absolutely. Obviously, you're super passionate, and this is something that you truly believe in. But I also want to talk to you what drove you to start your podcast, and your reception on that and so forth. So definitely, we need to schedule you now to come back. But also, I think Jason mentioned that you're teaching a class for us.
Yeah, so I offer a course through the Leading Equity Center entitled "Teaching Through a Culturally Diverse Lens," and it's a 6-module course that I house through my website, but I'm working with CEWT to facilitate that as well. So that's kind of in negotiation, I guess, in the works. So I don't have much more. Yeah.
Great.
I'll just put the plug out when the fall catalog comes out. Pay extra attention and it hopefully will be there. So that's our big thing. So with that being said, Dr. Aikens, how do people get a hold of you?
Well, if they're podcast listeners, I'm assuming so because they're listening to this show, you can find me as well. It's called Leading Equity, especially for our educators. I primarily have different conversations with guests. The other way to follow me is through Twitter at Sheldon Aikens, and that's EAKINS. I'm also on Instagram at Sheldon Aikens as well. And of course, you can go to my website, leadingequitycenter.com.
Very good.
Excellent.
Very good. Dr. Aikens, I don't even know, to be honest, if we could scratch the surface of this conversation.
We could go on for 2 hours, 3 hours, and not scratch the surface.
And I don't know if I still don't know if we do this again, I might ask another host to come in because I still feel like there was a lot better questions that could have helped nail this down. But I do want to tell you that I truly enjoyed this conversation, and I am excited to have you back on the show, and to just have an opportunity to have these kind of conversations was just extremely exciting and encouraging to me today. So I hope that it was beneficial for you. And and Paul, I appreciate you always.
I really loved. I learned what the equity term meant, and because I was thinking, for some reason, you see equity and you think about a financial division, division, and this is more of a social division. I'm thinking dollars and cents, and I think a lot of people think dollars and cents. In order to equalize things, hey, we need to contribute more to certain portions of society, which we do. But I'm thinking monetary, and this was more of a social thing.
Yeah. Yep. There's equity and mortgages and stuff like that, but this is more from the school perspective of how do we make sure individual needs are being met.
Very good. All right. Well, here's the last plug. We'll shut this down or we'll never get done. Here's the last plug is if you're listening to the show, check out our website, cetrain.isu.edu. That is cetrain@isu.edu. Check us out. Check out our podcast, our blog page, our class offerings. Keep your ears and eyes open for Dr. Sheldon Aikens in the future. I'm sure
we're going to have him back.
Well, I know, but on our class offerings and the things that we can do. With that being said, thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all continue to have a wonderful, wonderful day.